Grizzly bear attacks are a stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers in the wild. Whether hiking, camping, or hunting, venturing into bear country comes with risks that demand caution and preparation. While most encounters end without conflict, sudden surprises, territorial instincts, or food sources can trigger aggressive responses. Understanding what leads to these attacks, how to avoid them, and the best survival tactics can make all the difference. Nature is breathtaking, but it commands respect, especially when sharing space with one of its most powerful predators. The Alaskan wilderness in late October 1997 was unforgiving. The first snowfall had dusted the dense pine forest near the Kenai Peninsula, covering the ground in a deceptive blanket of silence. The temperature hovered just above freezing during the day and plummeted at night. The wind howled through the towering spruce and hemlock trees, carrying the scent of the distant sea and the musk of wild animals. Mark Talbot had spent over 2 decades hunting in this brutal terrain, yet he never underestimated its dangers. At 43, he was a seasoned moose hunter, confident in his knowledge of the land and the creatures that roamed it. He had hunted in sub-zero temperatures through blizzards and under the constant threat of predators, but that was part of the thrill. It was why he kept coming back. Armed with his trusted .338 Winchester Magnum, he had set out alone before dawn, tracking a massive bull moose he had spotted the evening before. The trail had been easy to follow at first, deep prints in the snow, fresh scat, and broken branches leading him deeper into the wilderness. The signs were unmistakable. The moose was close. He moved with practiced patience, careful to keep the wind in his favor. His camouflage hunting gear blended him seamlessly into the surroundings. The bull was in its prime, likely weighing close to 1,500 pounds, its massive antlers a testament to its dominance. Mark knew he had to get within a clean shooting distance to take it down efficiently. A poorly placed shot would mean tracking a wounded animal for miles, something he wanted to avoid at all costs. His breath clouded in front of him, the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. He adjusted his footing, ensuring each step was deliberate and quiet. His boots, well worn from years of trekking through rough terrain, crunched softly against the fresh snow. He had been hunting since he was a teenager, and he knew better than to rush. Every moment counted in the wilderness. Every movement had to be calculated. Then something changed. The prints ahead abruptly stopped. Mark frowned. That didn't make sense. A moose that size didn't just vanish. He scanned the area, his instincts immediately on edge. The woods had gone silent. The ever-present sounds of chattering squirrels, distant ravens, and rustling branches had disappeared, replaced by an eerie stillness, the kind of silence that didn't feel natural. Mark had spent enough time in the wild to know what that meant. Something was hunting. Slowly he turned, scanning his surroundings. He expected a wolf pack or even another hunter in the area. It was common for predators to shadow hunters, hoping for an easy meal. What he didn't expect was the feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was something deeper, something primal. The hair on the back of his neck prickled as his fingers tightened around his rifle. A faint crunch in the snow behind him sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. He swung his rifle up, but before he could react, a massive shape exploded from the brush. A grizzly, easily 900 pounds, moving with terrifying speed. The bear was a blur of muscle and fur, its breath steaming in the cold air, eyes locked onto him with predatory focus. Mark had no time to think. His instincts took over as he shouldered his rifle and squeezed the trigger. Click, his rifle jammed. A lifetime of hunting couldn't prepare him for the sheer force of nature barreling toward him. He had 3 seconds, maybe less, before the bear was on him. With no time to clear the jam, his hand shot down to his belt, gripping the only other weapon he had. a flare gun. The bear was close enough that Mark could see the saliva dripping from its open maw, could hear the deep guttural huffs as it charged. He yanked the flare gun free, aimed, and fired. The red-hot flare struck the bear in the face. The beast reared back with a deafening roar, its agonized screams reverberating through the trees. The acrid scent of burning fur filled the air as the bear clawed at its scorched muzzle, thrashing in pain. Mark didn't waste time. He turned and ran, crashing through the snow-covered undergrowth, his breath ragged as his heart slammed against his ribs. He ran until his legs burned, until his lungs felt like they would explode. His mind raced as he replayed what had just happened. Grizzlies were dangerous, but they weren't mindless killers. Had the bear been stalking him from the beginning? Had it been waiting for the right moment to strike? The thought chilled him more than the icy air. Only when he was sure he had put enough distance between himself and the wounded bear did he stop. His hands trembled as he reloaded his rifle, forcing himself to take slow, deep breaths. He could still hear the bear in the distance, its agonized bellows echoing through the trees. He had heard it, but a wounded bear was even more dangerous. If it was still capable of moving, it might come after him again. For the first time in his life, Mark had come face to face with a predator that nearly ended him. He had always respected the dangers of the wild, but this was different. This was something primal, something that reminded him that out here man was not at the top of the food chain. That night, he sat by his small fire, gripping his rifle tighter than ever before. He forced himself to eat, though his appetite was non-existent. The experience had rattled him in a way he hadn't expected. The wilderness had always been his second home, but he knew one thing for certain: he would never hunt alone again. The next morning, Mark wasted no time packing up his gear. His body ached from the previous day's ordeal, but he needed to get back to civilization. As he hiked back toward his truck, he remained hyper-aware of his surroundings. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow made his pulse quicken. He had always considered himself an apex predator, but now he knew better. When he finally reached his truck, he exhaled in relief. The battered old vehicle had never looked so welcoming. He threw his gear into the back, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel tightly. He had come out here for a moose, but instead, he had been hunted. Driving away, he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face was drawn, his eyes haunted. The Alaskan wilderness had given him many memories over the years, but this one would stay with him forever. Some stories were meant to be told around campfires with laughter and exaggerated details. This wasn't one of them. He knew the bear was still out there, somewhere in those vast, unforgiving woods, wounded, angry, and waiting. The Shadow Creek Forest in Montana stretched for miles in every direction, an untamed expanse of towering pines, winding rivers, and rugged mountain slopes. September 1987 had arrived, bringing with it the crisp air of early fall. The elk rut was in full swing, and the deep bugling calls echoed through the valleys, carrying on the breeze like the wild song of the mountains. The leaves were just beginning to turn, a mixture of deep green, golden yellow, and burnt orange, painting the forest in the warm hues of the season. Jake Reynolds and his hunting buddy, Travis McCann, had set up camp deep in the backcountry, miles from the nearest road. Both men were experienced hunters, having spent countless seasons tracking game in these very woods. Their gear was top-notch. Jake carried a .30-06 Springfield, a rifle that had never let him down, while Travis preferred Izzy's, .300 Win Mag for longer shots. They knew the area well, had planned this trip for months, and were confident in their ability to track down a trophy elk. They had spent the entire day tracking a large bull. The signs were unmistakable: scuffed dirt, broken branches, and the sharp scent of rotting musk. They had even caught a brief glimpse of the massive animal just before it disappeared into the thick pines, its towering antlers swaying with every powerful step. The hunt had been promising, but as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Range, they knew better than to pursue it in the dark. The wilderness was no place to navigate blindly, even for seasoned hunters like them. As night fell, they built a small fire, its glow flickering against the trees. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun was gone, and they pulled their coats tighter as they settled in. The night was peaceful at first, an occasional rustling in the brush, the distant yips of coyotes, and the comforting crackle of burning wood. The scent of their cooked rations mixed with the crisp air, and despite their exhaustion, the familiar routine of a hunt brought them a sense of ease. Then a sound broke the stillness, a whistle. It was high-pitched and eerie, almost melodic, like someone signaling in the distance. The tone was unnatural, too deliberate to be the wind, yet not quite human either. Jake and Travis exchanged glances. They weren't alone. They listened, their breath slowing as their senses heightened. At first, they thought it could be another hunter, though it was unusual for someone to be this deep in the woods without making themselves known. But then, the whistling moved, first from one direction, then another. It circled them. A cold unease settled in Jake's gut. He had been in the woods long enough to trust his instincts, and they were screaming at him now. He called out, asking if anyone was there, but the woods swallowed his voice. There was no response. Travis reached for his flashlight, scanning the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the thick trunks and undergrowth. The fire cast long, flickering shadows that played tricks on their eyes. Then something caught their attention. Two glowing orbs reflecting the light. At first they assumed it was a wolf, but something about the way the eyes stared, unblinking, intelligent, sent a shiver down Jake's spine. The eyes were too high off the ground, too steady. Wolves didn't stand like that. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The woods swallowed it whole. The fire suddenly felt too small, too dim. The sounds of the forest had returned, but they were wrong, forced, unnatural. The wind picked up, making the branches groan, but underneath it all, that whistling started again. They packed up immediately, dousing the fire and gathering their gear in record time. They weren't staying another second. As they shouldered their packs and started down the trail, the whistling grew louder, closer. It followed them. For miles, the sound echoed through the trees, always just behind them, always just out of sight. Sometimes it was to their left, sometimes to their right. It never faltered, never sped up, just kept its eerie, deliberate pace. The trek back to their truck was grueling. Every step felt like a battle against exhaustion and fear. The trail, which had felt so familiar in the daylight, now seemed foreign, winding in ways that didn't make sense. More than once, Jake swore they had passed the same fallen log or the same twisted tree. Travis muttered that they were being toyed with, and Jake didn't argue. At one point, Travis stopped dead in his tracks. Jake turned to see him frozen, his rifle raised. "There," Travis hissed, voice barely above a whisper. Jake followed his line of sight and saw it. A tall, dark figure standing just beyond the edge of their flashlight's reach. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Too thin, too elongated, and those eyes, glowing faintly, locked onto them with something that felt far more menacing than curiosity. Then, as if the forest itself had swallowed it, the figure stepped back into the darkness and disappeared. They ran after that. By the time they reached their truck at the trailhead, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. Their boots crunched against the gravel, and neither of them spoke as they loaded their gear into the truck. The whistling had stopped. The woods were silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. But they knew better. As Jake climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, he glanced one last time toward the tree line. A chill ran down his spine. The figure was there, just barely visible between the trees, watching. They never spoke about it again. Not to their families, not to their hunting buddies. It was something neither of them could explain, something they didn't want to acknowledge. But Jake changed after that night. Every time he went back into the woods, he carried an extra flashlight and a lingering sense of unease, because sometimes in the dead of night when the wind howled through the trees, he swore he could still hear that whistle. The dense forests of Black Wilderness in Ontario in 1977 were a hunter's paradise in October. The crisp air carried the scent of damp earth and pine, while the golden hues of autumn leaves painted the vast wilderness in a breathtaking display. It was peak rut season, and the massive bull moose were aggressive, their hormones surging as they clashed over territory and mates. The eerie echo of their grunts and the violent crashing of antlers through the brush filled the air, a constant reminder of the beasts lurking within the trees. Daniel Mercer had been hunting these woods for years. A skilled outdoorsman, he prided himself on his ability to track game, read the land, and make clean, ethical kills. Armed with his .300 Winchester Magnum, he felt confident. He had been tracking a massive bull since sunrise, following fresh prints through thick undergrowth and listening for its distinct calls. The animal was close, very close. The terrain was unforgiving. Fallen logs, tangled roots, and dense thickets made progress slow. The forest floor was a mixture of damp earth and decomposing leaves, making each step a delicate balance between stealth and stability. Daniel moved cautiously, careful not to spook the moose. His years of experience told him that patience was key. He stopped periodically, listening for any sound that would betray the animal's position. The bull was out there, somewhere just beyond sight, its presence marked by fresh droppings and deep hoof prints pressed into the soft ground. Finally, after nearly an hour of careful tracking, he caught sight of it. A towering beast standing in a clearing, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold morning air. The bull was magnificent, its antlers spanning over 5 feet, with each tine sharp enough to gut a man. It pawed at the earth, grunting aggressively, unaware of Daniel's presence. His breath came slow and steady as he positioned himself behind a thick spruce tree, bringing his rifle to his shoulder. The wind was in his favor, carrying his scent away from the animal. He had the perfect shot lined up. Just as he squeezed the trigger, a branch snapped behind him. The moose's ears flicked forward. It turned its massive head, locking eyes with Daniel. For a split second, neither moved. Then the hunter was no longer the predator. The tables had turned. The bull exploded into motion. Daniel barely had time to react. He fired, but his rush shot went wide, grazing the beast's shoulder. Instead of deterring it, the pain only enraged the moose further. It lowered its head and charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Daniel turned and ran. He had hunted bears, faced down wolves, but nothing prepared him for the raw power of an enraged moose. The ground trembled beneath its weight, branches snapping like gunfire as it barreled after him. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He weaved through the trees, hoping to lose the bull in the dense forest, but the beast was relentless. His second shot misfired. A wave of panic surged through him. He had no time to clear the jam. The moose was almost on him. He spotted a large, fallen log ahead and leaped over it, landing hard on the damp ground. Scrambling to his feet, he darted behind a thick pine just as the bull crashed into it with bone-shattering force. The impact sent vibrations through Daniel's body. He could feel the power of the animal through the tree, as though the very earth shook beneath its fury. The moose reared back and circled, huffing angrily, its dark eyes burning with rage. Blood trickled from its wounded shoulder, but it showed no sign of stopping. Daniel crouched low, forcing his breath to slow. His mind raced. He knew he couldn't outrun it forever. He needed a new plan, and fast. The bull charged again. With no time to think, Daniel lunged, his hands finding the handle of his hunting knife. As the moose barreled past the tree, he sidestepped and drove the blade deep into its thick neck, right behind the jaw. The bull reared back, bellowing in agony, its powerful legs kicking up dirt and leaves. Blood sprayed onto the forest floor, painting the fallen leaves in a dark crimson hue. Daniel held on, twisting the knife, knowing he had to end it quickly before the animal could recover. The bull staggered, its breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment it stood there, towering over Daniel, nostrils flaring, muscles quivering with exhaustion and pain. Then, finally, its massive body gave out. The beast collapsed, exhaling one last shuddering breath before falling still. Daniel stumbled back, his own breath coming in heavy gasps. His hands shook as he wiped the blood from his blade onto his pant leg. He had faced death before, but this was different. It was raw, primal, a reminder that in the wilderness, man was not always in control. He sat there for a long time, staring at the fallen bull. His pulse was still hammering in his ears. Slowly, the reality of what had just happened settled in. He had survived, but just barely. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and he would have been the one lying dead on the forest floor. The sun had begun to rise higher, casting dappled light through the trees. Daniel forced himself to his feet, his muscles protesting every movement. His rifle still lay a few feet away where he had dropped it in the chaos. He picked it up, checking it carefully before slinging it over his shoulder. He had planned to hunt today, but the hunt had nearly turned on him. His body ached, his mind replaying the charge over and over. It would take hours to process the bull, and even longer to haul the meat back to camp. But for now, he needed a moment to breathe, to let the adrenaline drain from his system. Battered but victorious, he limped back to camp, carrying a story he would tell for the rest of his life. By the time he reached his tent, exhaustion had fully set in. He collapsed onto a nearby log, his hands still trembling. The fire pit from the night before sat cold and untouched, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded in the woods. He exhaled, long and slow, trying to steady himself. As he sat there staring into the wilderness, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He had always respected nature, but today it had reminded him just how unforgiving it could be. It had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and he had barely made it out. After that, Daniel never underestimated a bull moose again. The wind howled through the Coldwater Range, sending flurries of snow spiraling through the darkening sky. It was late November of 1986, and a powerful cold front had swept down from the north, blanketing the Wyoming wilderness in an early winter storm. Bill Carter, a seasoned mule deer hunter, had spent the last 3 days trekking through the backcountry, his .270 Winchester rifle slung over his shoulder, his pack heavy with supplies. The hunt had been slow, signs of deer were scarce, and the weather had turned against him. As the snow thickened, visibility dropped to near zero. The bitter wind cut through his thick wool jacket, numbing his fingers despite the insulated gloves. Bill knew he needed shelter, and soon. His map showed an old hunting cabin about a mile from his location, one he had used years ago with a friend. It wasn't much, just a single-room structure built by hunters long before, but it would keep him out of the worst of the storm. The mile stretched longer than he expected. His boots sank into the fresh powder with every step, the effort of trudging through knee-deep snow, making his legs burn. The storm had come in fast, and he cursed himself for pushing too far from camp. His breath came out in thick, icy clouds, and his beard was already coated with frost. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, He spotted the dark silhouette of the cabin through the swirling snow. Relief washed over him. The small wooden structure stood just as he remembered, weather-worn, slightly leaning, but still intact. He pushed open the door, stepping inside and shaking the snow from his jacket. That's when he noticed it. A fresh deer carcass hung just outside the cabin, its blood still steaming in the freezing air. Bill's pulse quickened. He hadn't seen another hunter for miles. Who had left it here? More importantly, were they still around? The interior of the cabin was just as he recalled. A cot against one wall, a rusted wood stove in the corner, and a small table with an old oil lamp sitting on top. But something was off. A pile of firewood was stacked neatly beside the stove, and there were footprints in the dust leading toward the cot. Someone had been here recently. Bill's grip tightened on his rifle as he scanned the room. There were no signs of immediate danger, no backpacks, no weapons left behind. But that didn't mean much. He didn't like the idea of an unknown person lurking in the woods, especially not in this weather. Still, with the storm outside growing worse, he had little choice but to stay. He bolted the door, lit the oil lamp, and got a fire going in the stove. The warmth spread slowly, driving out the chill that had settled in his bones. As he ate a quick meal, his mind kept circling back to the deer carcass. Why would someone leave it there, exposed to scavengers? If it had been killed today, why wasn't the hunter inside the cabin taking shelter from the storm? Hours passed. The wind howled relentlessly, rattling the cabin walls. Bill tried to rest, but a nagging unease kept him awake. The flickering light of the oil lamp cast long shadows across the walls, making the small room feel even smaller. He kept his rifle within arm's reach, his senses on high alert. Around midnight, just as he was drifting off, a noise jolted him upright. Footsteps, crunching in the snow just outside the door. Bill's breath caught in his throat. He sat up slowly, rifle in hand, listening. The steps were slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. He willed himself to stay calm. If it were another hunter, they would have knocked by now. Then the door rattled. Not a knock, a testing push, slow and firm. Bill's heart pounded. He reached for the lantern and turned the wick down low, casting the room in near darkness. He pressed his back against the wall, positioning himself so he had a clear line of sight to the door. Whoever was outside wasn't speaking. No call of greeting, no explanation, just the quiet press of weight against the wood. Then silence. Bill gripped his rifle tighter, waiting. The wind outside roared, but no more footsteps sounded. He waited for what felt like an eternity, breath shallow, every muscle tense. Finally, when he could bear it no longer, he moved toward the door and peered through a crack in the wood. Nothing. Just the empty, snow-covered forest stretching out into the darkness. Bill didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat in the corner, his rifle resting across his knees, ears straining for any sound. The fire in the stove had burned low, casting an eerie orange glow across the cabin. Every now and then he thought he heard faint noises beyond the howling wind, a soft crunch of snow, a whisper of movement. But he couldn't be sure if it was real or his mind playing tricks on him. When dawn finally broke, casting pale light through the frosted windows, he cautiously unbolted the door and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine blanket of snow across the landscape. The air was eerily still, the silence pressing against his ears. Then he saw the footprints, a single set leading up to the cabin door, but none leading away. A deep unease settled in his gut. He scanned the tree line, rifle raised, every sense on high alert. The forest stood quiet, indifferent. Whoever had been outside last night had either vanished or was still watching. Bill didn't wait to find out. He gathered his gear in record time, slinging his pack over his shoulders and securing his rifle. The deer carcass still hung near the cabin, untouched despite the night. He gave it one last glance before heading down the trail at a brisk pace, his head on a swivel, checking every shadow between the trees. The entire way back to his truck, the feeling of being watched never left him. When he finally reached his vehicle, he wasted no time loading his gear and starting the engine. As the truck rumbled to life, he exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel. He had spent his entire life in the wilderness, had faced storms, predators, and every kind of danger nature could throw at him. But this was something else. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The cabin stood alone in the distance, half buried in snow, its door slightly ajar. A part of him wanted to believe it had all been his imagination, that the storm had played tricks on his senses, that the footprints were a coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. Something or someone had been there that night, and they had never left. The Cascade Mountains in Washington were both breathtaking and unforgiving in early November. The thick, evergreen forests stretched endlessly, their dense canopies casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. The crisp air carried the distant cries of ravens and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures. It was black-tailed deer season, and Eric Lawson was exactly where he wanted to be, deep in the wilderness, miles away from the noise of civilization. It was 1925, and Eric had spent years perfecting his craft. At 38, he was an experienced outdoorsman, well-versed in tracking, field dressing, and survival. Equipped with his trusted rifle, a well-worn hunting knife, and enough provisions to last several days, he felt prepared for anything nature could throw at him. But no amount of experience could prepare him for what happened that day. Eric had set out early that morning, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. He had scouted the area the day before and had seen plenty of signs, tracks, fresh droppings, even a few distant glimpses of deer moving through the undergrowth. By midday, his patience paid off. A large, healthy blacktail buck stepped into a clearing, its sleek coat blending perfectly with the autumn colors. He steadied his rifle, heart pounding as he lined up the shot. A deep breath, a slow squeeze of the trigger, and the sharp crack of the .270 echoed through the trees. The buck staggered, then collapsed. Eric exhaled, lowering the rifle. A clean kill. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and approached, his knife already in hand. Field dressing was second nature to him, but he still took his time, making careful incisions, ensuring that he preserved as much meat as possible. The process was methodical, almost meditative, until something changed. The forest had gone silent. He paused, knife hovering over the carcass. The usual sounds of the woods, the chirping of birds, the rustling of small creatures in the brush, had vanished. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept up his spine. His horse, tied a few yards away, suddenly let out a sharp, nervous snort. It shifted restlessly, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. Eric froze. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he reached for his rifle, scanning the surrounding trees. His senses sharpened, muscles tensed as he listened. The wind had picked up, rustling the treetops, but beneath it, something moved. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle, then a blur of motion. Before he could react, a cougar launched from the underbrush, a tawny blur of muscle and claws. It came from the side, silent and deadly. Eric barely had time to raise his rifle before the impact sent him sprawling, the weight of the big cat crashing into his chest. The world spun. Pain erupted across his left arm as claws raked through his thick hunting jacket, slicing deep into the flesh beneath. His rifle flew from his grip, landing somewhere in the brush. He barely had time to react before the cougar was on top of him, its powerful jaws snapping inches from his throat. Years of instinct took over. Eric thrust his arm up, forcing it between himself and the cougar's gaping maw. The animal's teeth sank into his forearm, pain exploding through him, but it gave him the opening he needed. With his free hand, he reached for his belt, his hunting knife. The cougar growled, its hot breath against his face, its golden eyes burning with predatory fury. With a desperate, explosive movement, Eric yanked the knife from its sheath and drove it up into the cat's ribcage. The blade sank deep. The cougar let out an ear-splitting shriek, its body convulsing as the steel bit into vital organs. Still, it fought, thrashing wildly. Eric twisted the knife using every ounce of strength he had left. Then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, the big cat collapsed. Eric pushed the lifeless body off him and rolled onto his back, gasping for breath. His arm throbbed, blood soaking through his torn jacket, but he was alive. His chest heaved as he tried to steady himself, eyes still locked onto the cougar's motionless form. It had stalked him. He realized that now. The signs had been there, the unnatural silence, his horse's nervous behavior, but he had ignored them, too focused on his deer to notice that he had become prey. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself upright, wincing as pain flared through his arm. He had to move. The scent of blood would attract scavengers, and he had no desire to meet another predator today. Gathering his rifle, his knife, and his pack, he stumbled back to his horse. The animal was still agitated, ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flared. Eric placed a reassuring hand on its neck, murmuring softly as he mounted. He left the deer behind. Riding away from the clearing, the pain in his arm a harsh reminder, he glanced back one last time. The cougar lay where he had left it, its lifeless body blending with the forest floor. The wilderness had tested him that day, nearly taken him. From that moment on, Eric never let his guard down again. He had always considered himself a hunter. That day, he had learned what it felt like to be hunted. The Bitter Creek Highlands in Idaho was not for the faint of heart. In the late September chill of 1993, the rugged landscape was a mix of towering pines, steep ridges, and miles of unbroken solitude. It was black bear season, and Travis Colton had been looking forward to this trip for months. An experienced hunter at 44, he knew these mountains well. He also knew the risks. This was grizzly country, and sometimes the line between black bears and their larger, deadlier cousins wasn't so clear. Travis had set out at dawn, his rifle strapped securely to his back, a sidearm holstered at his hip. He had been tracking a large black bear for hours, noting clawed-up tree trunks and fresh scat along a game trail near the river. This was a big one, likely over 300 pounds, prime for the taking. Every few minutes, he would stop, listen, and scan the trees for movement. Hunting black bears required patience, and he had plenty of it. By late afternoon, he caught sight of his target. The bear was massive, its jet black coat sleek under the fading sunlight. It was rummaging near a berry patch, unaware of Travis's presence. He steadied his rifle, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The echo of the gunshot rolled through the valley as the bear collapsed. Perfect heart-lung shot. Travis exhaled, lowering the rifle. A clean kill, or so he thought. The moment he took a step forward, the bear twitched. Then it stood up. Travis barely had time to react before the wounded animal turned, locking eyes with him. Blood poured from its mouth, its chest heaving, but it didn't go down. Instead, it charged. He fired again. Another hit, this time in the shoulder, but the bear didn't stop. It barreled toward him, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to. Travis scrambled backward, reloading as he went. He had hunted for decades, but nothing had ever prepared him for something like this. He fired a third shot, point blank, hitting the bear square in the chest. It faltered but kept coming. Then it was on him. Travis barely managed to raise his rifle before the full weight of the beast crashed into him, knocking him to the ground. Claws raked across his thigh, shredding his hunting pants and slicing into flesh. Pain exploded through him, but he didn't have time to focus on it. He had been in close encounters before, but this wasn't just a wounded animal. This was something determined to kill him. With a grunt of effort, he shoved his rifle barrel against the bear's neck and pulled the trigger. Click, empty. The bear's hot breath was on his face, its blood mixing with his as it loomed over him. Desperate, Travis reached for his sidearm, a .44 Magnum revolver. He barely got it free before the bear lunged again. He pressed the barrel under its chin and fired. The shot echoed through the trees. The bear shuddered, its body seizing up, and then finally, it stopped moving. Travis lay there for a long moment, staring up at the sky, breath coming in ragged gasps. His leg throbbed, his arms ached, but he was alive. He wiped sweat from his brow, his hands trembling. Even in death, the bear looked terrifying. It had taken 4 direct shots, any of which should have been fatal, yet it had fought to the very end. Shakily, Travis pushed himself upright. He checked his wounds. His leg was bleeding, but it wasn't as bad as he had feared. Still, he would need to clean it before the infection set in. He knew one thing for certain. He had hunted plenty of bears in his lifetime, but he had never encountered anything like this, and he never wanted to again. With one last glance at the fallen beast, he limped back toward camp, knowing this was one story he'd be telling for the rest of his life.